Well, I was at a party somewhere in the Hollywood Hills 2 years ago when Sweet Hereafter was nominated for an Academy Award, and I was feeling very disoriented at this party. It was full of people who I'd seen only on screen, and I was just trying to sort my way through. And Norman was there, and he grabbed me by the arm, and he took me over to meet Jack Valenti. And he said, and Valenti is in some ways the figurehead for a lot of what Norman was talking about before in terms of our indoctrination and our exposure to American culture. And Norman, gripping me very tightly, said, Jack, this boy is nominated for a Canadian movie, and it's set in Canada. Jack, it's a Canadian movie. And I was looking at Jack Valenti, and I didn't really know what to say, and Norman kept repeating that. And it was actually one of the most extraordinary moments in my life, and he made that whole strange parade of events, he put it into a context, and he made me realize where I was and how proud I was. So I don't know if I think I thanked him for that. I don't know where he is right now, Norman, but I thank you again. And I also thought, as I was looking at Norman up here, that here's this man who has made an incredible body of work using a technology that has not changed, that has not fundamentally changed for 100 years. Since the birth of cinema, the technology has remained the same. And a lot of you here today are working in technologies that change constantly. And as filmmakers, it's a very odd time because there's this sense of threat that we all feel. And I've been trying to understand what that's about. Like, why do we feel that something is being lost? And I used to say that it was because digital projection can never match film projection, until I took my son to see Dinosaur the other afternoon at the Paramount, which was digitally projected, and it looked phenomenal. So I was trying to deal with that. And then the other day, I went to his classroom where his class, 6-year-olds, were having a party or a presentation for the parents. And of course, the moment the kids got up, everyone took out their digicameras, and there was like a battery of parents holding it up. And there was like this one parent who didn't have one and saw that I had mine, you know, and I was like holding it out like this, and came over and said, "Can you get my kid, because I don't have my camera?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." And I realized at that point I didn't know which kid was his. So I kind of like was doing this thing, and then this person grabbed my arm, and looking at this, which now comes with these, you know, was able to kind of like direct my hand to where their kid was. And it occurred to me that, you know, there was a time when looking through a viewfinder was a very private and kind of sacred experience. Like, you know, you were alone with the material, and there was something very, sacred about that almost. You know, and that it's now, I don't know what the intention about these things was. I think it was so that you could show people, you know, the material afterwards. It certainly never in my mind crossed that it would be that, you know, so that someone else could direct what you were shooting. And then right after that, something very unusual happened, which is that one of the kids had taken their parents' camera and was filming their friends. And then my son came up and said, "Daddy, can I take your camera?" And I, without thinking, gave it to him. This is what he shot. You want to play that? You want to play the digital stuff?
Not even in the mirror. You're too close. You turned out to see. I want to be a Oscar wiener. Why? You do? Okay. I'll tell you. I'll tell the Toronto's news. Today our seal went to the bathroom. Today Rebecca. Oh, come on. My boobs. You like to have my boobs? Hi, it's me, Mr. Handman. I never knew that.
I'm good with the hand on the leg.
get the idea. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's, yeah. It's very energetic. It's actually quite inspired. And I was like looking at it, and I thought of something, and I had this flash. And the flash was being at a party when I was a kid, seeing a friend of my parents shooting film, and going up and asking if I could use the camera. And that friend of my father said, "You can't, because I only have 2 minutes of film, and it's really expensive." And from that moment, I had this sort of sense that there was something about film, that it was rare, that it was a privilege to be able to shoot. And when you did shoot, you had to be very, very selective. And you had to know exactly why. You had to make a commitment. And then I started thinking about the fact that the technology hasn't changed. And I started thinking about how corny and awful dream sequences in movies usually are, because the moment you cut to a dream sequence, it never really feels like what you think a dream sequence is. And the stuff that actually feels like a dream sequence is the movie itself. Movies, to me, when I'm watching them, I feel like I'm in a dream sequence the moment a movie starts. And I thought that it's curious that the language, the grammar of film, has not changed fundamentally in 100 years. That from the moment people started making films, they had this notion of like an axis, where you could put the camera, how you would cover scenes, medium shots, close-ups, master plan. And this came to us effortlessly. And for all the kind of like reinventions of like the 60s with the new wave and different ways of like cutting, it has never really taken hold. We make movies essentially the same way we did when we started. And I thought perhaps that's because what happened is that when the first film cameras came, we tripped upon this technology which allowed us to shoot stuff in the way we dream. That actually, filmmaking is the closest we actually come to how we dream. And that when we dream, we probably organize our thoughts and our fears and our anxieties in a way not completely different from how conventional films are presented. And a lot of that has to do with the process of selection. What we are now entering into, it seems to me, is a time when the image and image taking becomes ubiquitous, that there's no real process of selection, that you shoot whatever you can. There's no sense that what you're doing is in any way rare. And maybe it's even to do with something vaguely biblical, because it's not really a graven image anymore. Up until this point, there's been some process of etching away at some material to make an image, either through celluloid, through light exposure, through magnetic tape, through realignment of sort of magnetic fields. Something has been graven into something else. But digital technology is about letting go of the graven image. We are now making images which are rendered numerically. And that is what probably is at the root of an anxiety that I feel, and kind of a sense that maybe there's a whole generation coming up which won't have the same sense of what an image means that I thought it did. And this is irreversible. I mean, there's nothing we can do to kind of change that. Certainly giving a video camera to a 5-year-old isn't going to help the situation. But then, of course, you're not going to actually tell that person as well that you can't shoot, that this is something that's really special. And then when you see what they've shot and you see the sheer energy of it and the excitement of it, it's inspiring. You sort of think, well, maybe every image in our culture should be made by 5-year-olds. That maybe we should be equipping all this, like when we make movies, we should be actually bringing in 5-year-olds and giving them video cameras and tell them to shoot what they want and then edit it all later on, and or let them edit it all later on. I don't know. It's a curious time for me, just because I think that I have a very, very particular approach to what I do. And a lot of that has to do with the notion of a tension that exists between what it is people want to see, expect to see, and what is actually unfolding. And that a lot of what is happening now is allowing people access to whatever they want, and that they can go and make those directions themselves. But that changes in some fundamental way the notion of what a storyteller does. A storyteller is beginning a story which is going to end at a certain place, and that the relationship of the audience or the viewer is in anticipating where that might go. and in projecting. But that is now in your hands. And I'm not necessarily sure if that allows stories to govern on any sort of moral principle. And the idea of democracy, or the democratization of image, and the notion of where a story will go if it's sort of built collectively, is something which is very exciting at a theoretical level. I mean, I can't, tell you how excited I was to hear some of the ideas that were being presented yesterday in terms of where consciousness, is going. But I think we also have to look at where consciousness seems to me of animals. We are the most vulnerable. 3 years ago I was at a zoo at the moment when a giraffe was being born. And it was just one of these incredible freak situations where I saw the giraffe drop, and it was immediately on its feet. Within minutes, it was on its feet, and it was walking around. We had a nest at our house. We had robins, and I couldn't believe how quickly they grew and were able to fly. I always thought that the parents had to teach them how to fly, but in fact, they kind of fly just like that. And it seems to me that for the first year of our lives, we are completely helpless. We are just, don't let Bob give you the wrong idea, but we were actually, on our backs. And that we actually learn consciousness probably by looking at our parents and people's faces. That we are actually, we are downloading consciousness through eye contact and through that physical contact that we have with our parents. And if that's the case, this is, I think, a very bizarre culture we live in, because if eye contact is the source by which we download consciousness, we spend a great amount of our time looking at mediated images of people looking at us with full eye contact on a video screen. And we can believe or fantasize that they're looking at us, but they're not. They're looking at millions and millions of people. And the private sort of fantasy that we have to sustain is that they're looking at us and that they're giving us their undivided attention. And it's an incredibly lonely way to kind of become conscious, I think. Anyway, I'm still really I'm incredibly passionate about what I do. A lot of that passion exists in terms of my relationship with an audience which is very, very curious and exploratory, who is very hopeful about what they will find in a film. And I think that I will continue to make films because I have the opportunity to. The technologies that are available to me are extremely exciting because they allow me now to say to young filmmakers who come to me and ask for advice, do it yourself. I can easily say to them, you just take one of these cameras, you shoot whatever you need to do, and if you edit it at home, you can then actually have a means to present a story. You don't need to get money from other people. You can actually do it yourself. And that's very liberating at one level. But I do think that there's also something else that I would like to be able to tell, which is that it is a really rare thing. That being behind a camera lens, being able to actually judge which way a story is going to go, why it should go that way, why an audience can be reformatted to think in a way that is not what they expect. And that's what it comes down to, I suppose, is that so much of the pleasure of watching films is about expectations being confronted. And when you are in control of what you're doing, I don't know if you can actually arrive at that place. You can't necessarily be surprised by something that you're conducting yourself. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much.